You're listening to the Lakewood Vineyard Podcast. We are part of a family of neighborhood churches called the Mile High Vineyard. For more information about our church or those we are connected to, please go to lakewoodvineyard.org. Stay tuned at the end of our podcast for ways you can respond personally to what you've just heard.
Well, have you seen those TV shows where it starts with the subtext, today? And then there's, the protagonist, usually it doesn't happen until further on into the first, second, third season, You see the subtitle, and the protagonist is in some dire situation, and you're just dropped into this situation. You're like, what is going on? I have to know. It just asks tons of questions today. And then it cuts back to another scene 2 weeks ago. So dramatic. Well, I actually had to Google around just to find what to search for the term that I was looking for. Turns out that's called a narrative story structure. And the name for it is in media res. I probably butchered that pronunciation horribly. Somebody can correct me later if you also happen to know. But it's from the poet Horace, and it means into the middle of things. It's kind of a category of narrative storytelling. Types of this include whole episode flashback. You think about all your TV shows that you're seeing that, you're just like, oh no, a whole episode. They phoned it in on this one. It's just a whole episode of reusing clips from earlier in the show. How Dad Met Mom, that's another one. There's literally a TV show that's named essentially that. Yep, that's the whole show. It is this. And then lastly, we have How We Got Here, which feels about right. That's how did we get here? Just keep that in the back of your mind as we continue. So today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 22 as we continue through our series called Family Mess. It's going to be a great time, you guys. If you've been or if you've seen me talk about the Bible, this is like one of my favorite topics. So not Genesis 22, the Bible is. I was not excited about Genesis 22, though, and then I became excited. So hopefully we can impart some excitement into you guys today about Genesis 22. So let's jump right in. So starting with today, Genesis 22, verses 1 through 10. Bless you. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, what was that? Hineni. Yep. Wonderful. Just a quick side note. Hineni is this delightful word that shows up in Scripture. It's Hebrew. It's combination, kind of a jamming together two words, hine and ani. Ani is I. Hine is sort of behold or hear. So hineni is behold, here am I. So God calls to Abraham and he says, hineni. Thank you. And he said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So, I'm sorry. Do we have any Bema listeners in the room? All right, I've got a few. All right, we're gonna try it Bema style. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him and his son Yitzchak. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Yitzchak his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them together. And Yitzchak said to his father, Abraham, my father. I love it. Thank you so much for helping with this. This is so good. Now I lost my spot. Hang on, I got to get back to it. I'll see here. Where was I? And Isaac said to his son, my father. He said, here I am, my son. Hineni, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. All right. Did you catch what we did there? Okay. All right. Here's the deal. This is a commonly, I don't know, I feel like this is one of those passages that you read in the Bible and you're just wondering to yourself, why is this here? Other questions might include, why would God ask him to do this? So many questions that we would ask. The other ones like, this doesn't seem to fit with the Jesus that I know. It seems pretty strange that God would ask Abraham to sacrifice his only beloved son here. We have so many questions. So we're going to have to go back 13 years to explain how we got to today. Spoiler alert, we're actually going to have to go back a number of times. So if you have a Bible, keep your finger in the different, you're going to need all of them, to be honest. I have many tabs in my Bible today for this, so you don't have to wait for me to flip around. But we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. You see, the question we need to answer is, why did God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son, Yitzchak? That's Isaac, by the way. Why not ask him to sacrifice, I don't know, his son offers a lamb for a burnt offering? Why not a lamb? Why his son? At first glance, this looks a whole lot like family mess, a whole lot of family mess. This is just about as messy as it gets. So we're going to try to answer that question today because the answer is deeply profound, I think, and frankly, very exciting. I love Scripture. It's so good. All right, let's go back to Genesis chapter 17. We're going to see if we can answer this question. We're going to have to answer it in stages because Scripture answers it in stages. So verse 19. So Abraham is having a conversation with God here, and they're kind of going back and forth about essentially the promise of God. And Abraham asks, hey, what about my son Ishmael? And God answers here in verse 19, if I can find it, very small text. God said, no, but Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Yitzchak. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. So we see here the first piece to the puzzle. God is not just asking Abraham to sacrifice Yitzchak, his son. He's asking Abraham to sacrifice his future, the nation, the promise of God, right? What is this covenant, though? We have to go back again, 24 years ago. We're going to go to Genesis 12 this time. Verses 1 through 3. What is this covenant? What is this promise of God is the question. Now the Lord said to Avram, he's not Abraham this time, he's Avram, because we're going back in time. Now the Lord said to Avram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in all the families of the earth, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. What a calling. All the nations of the earth, in you, all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Wow, the bar is high. But this leaves us with more questions here. See, if we read this more closely, we see the blessing of God here, the promise of God is that he will make Avram into a great nation. That's pretty awesome. And he says, I will bless you. I will make your name great. And then the last one, in you, I will bless the nations of the world. See, this is a twofold promise. God wants to bless Avram and his family line, but he also wants to bless the whole world. And he wants Avram to be a part of it. So that sounds great. That's very admirable. But if you sit and think about that, and you start to kind of plug and play people that you know, people that you don't know, into the place of Avram, and you say, if God were to tell this person, I'm going to bless you and make you a great nation, what do you think the average Joe would do with that promise? They would probably abuse it. I mean, if you think about it, when God, and this is a struggle for all of us. This is not, and me too. This sermon is, I was just telling somebody in the back, this sermon's been preaching at me for 8 weeks. That's how long I've known about it. This is so hard. When God blesses you, it is so easy to just take that blessing and say, look at this great thing I have. Just gonna walk away with this, right? And not use it for the heart of God. So this begs, I think, one final question, and this is really we're going to get just a little bit further back in history, and then we'll jump further forwards. We'll get in media res, in the middle of things again. Why did God choose Avram? That's the question. See, the first time I heard that question, I thought, man, I never thought to ask that question. I didn't know that question needed to be asked. But when you read the promise of God, God doesn't just say, I'm going to bless the whole world. He says, I'm going to bless the whole world. I'm going to bless you. And through you, I will bless the whole world. That takes a very special kind of person who will not take this great name, this great blessing, this great nation into which they've been made, and take it and do with it what they please. It takes a very special kind of person. What kind of person does that take? So in the Old Testament, the way the authors tend to write things is there's lots of like little bits and doodads the authors of the Old Testament leave around to kind of hint or to tell you things. Hey, you should pay attention here. And one of the most important things in the Old Testament is, I'm sorry for the dad joke here, or the pun, the genesis of a person. Where did they come into the story? Happens to be that Avram comes in Genesis. Where does Avram come into the story? Most of the time you look this up, people will say Genesis chapter 12, where we just heard. God says, go forth from your father's lands, and I will show you where to go. That is not where we meet Avram. We meet him a few verses previously. All of my Bema podcast listeners already know where this is headed. There's an episode about this particular thing. We go to the end of chapter 11. I don't have a bookmark for that because it's right there. It's nice. Okay, so a long time ago. Genesis 11, verses 27 through 32. This is just about one of the most exciting pieces of text in the Bible, in my opinion. It's genealogy. Now, these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Avram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans, it's Kasdim in Hebrew. Anyways. And Avram and Nahor took wives. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Yiscah. Now Sarai was barren, and she had no child. Terah took Avram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Avram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. How many of you followed that, and you just have a family tree in your head? It's just so easy to follow, isn't it? What's wonderful. We have to sit with this for a minute. We really have to sit and think about this, because this is telling a story. It looks like genealogy. It looks boring. But this is telling us a deep and meaningful story about why God chose Avram. You see, we have here Avram and Nahor, and they are sons of Terah, right? And then we have Haran over here, who fathered Milcah and Yiscah. Now, the theologians of old, the sages, generally agree that Yiscah is actually another name for Sarai. It's the same person. It's a descriptor of Sarai. I've also heard it said that it's the meaning of Sarai in Hebrew in Aramaic. I don't know Aramaic, so I can't weigh in on that one. But generally speaking, it's agreed that Yiscah is Sarai here. So Haran dies. It says here in verse 28, Haran died in the presence of his father Terah. Haran dies. Milcah and Yiscah, Sarai, no longer have a father. Later on in Deuteronomy, we learn that there is a law put in place that if a person dies with no children, somebody has to step forth to continue that person's family line. That law has not been given yet. So what does Avram and Nahor, his brother, do? Well, the way it's worded, Avram's name comes first, and that seems to indicate, in the style of writing of the time, it seems to indicate that this was Avram's idea. He says, Nahor, let's go take for us some wives from these two women whose father has just died. And then there's a little secret note that you just blow right past as you read this passage. It's so easy to read right past it. It has very little to do with the genealogy. And Sarai was barren. That is deeply meaningful, folks, because that indicates to us that Avram knew this, which means Avram said, hey, let's continue Haran's family name. He's died. He has no children. Let's continue his family name. So they're doing this for Haran, a brother of theirs. And then when it comes time to pick, he chooses the barren woman. Because the thing is that in that time, no one in their right mind would choose to marry a barren woman, because that kills your future. You will have no children after that. That is terminating your family line. And yet Avram chooses Sarai, the barren woman. That seems very meaningful to me. Because Avram here sacrifices his future to redeem the future of someone else. Because at the time, she would have never been married. She would have really probably not been very prosperous, because we all know the history of the whole thing where men provided that kind of thing. She would have been alone the rest of her life. And Avram steps into her life, sacrifices his own future, and says, I will be with you, and cuts off his own future. That is the kind of man that God is looking for. Because immediately, in the next verse, in chapter 12, God calls to Avram and says, hey, I want you to leave your father's land. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to bless the world through you. Because that's the kind of person it takes, someone who will sacrifice their future for the blessing and the redemption of someone else. That's who God chose. That's why God chose Avram. So, in media res, back to the middle of things. Let's see if we can do this here. Where was I? I was about here. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Avram built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Yitzchak, his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Avram reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Avraham, the name's changed, sorry. Avraham, I'm going to mix it up so much, I'm sorry. And he said, Hineni, here am I. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. And as it is said to this day, On the mountain of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn. That is a lot. God is stating, by myself I have sworn. Wow. Declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven and as the sand is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Let's take a minute and appreciate some ironies here. In chapter 11, Avram marries a barren woman. And then in chapter 12, the promise of God comes to say, I will make you into a great nation, you who chose a woman that can't have children. Some good irony there, right? And here we have Yitzchak, his only son, according to the text. And God calls the one opportunity that Abraham has to become a great nation. God calls him to sacrifice his only son. That's hard. And here the passage seems to indicate to us that this is God testing Abraham. But you all may have been wondering about the shirt. There's a chiasm in here. So exciting. It's going to be on the screen in a second, but I'm just so excited, you guys. I love this stuff. This is just, it's a hidden message that the author puts in there. They said, hey, here's the message the text says. Here's another extra message for you, for those who are willing to go looking, for those who are willing to go digging in a field for some treasure. Let's go digging. So when you have a chiasm, oftentimes the author of the chiasm will drop a hint, something in there that says, this is obviously a chiasm. You should look closer for other less obvious things that make the chiasm happen. And here we have it. So right here you can see the B's. So this is an A, B, C, B, A chiasm. You'll see here, so they went, both of them together. Did anybody notice that that's got stated twice, verbatim? Twice. That tells us there's a chiasm. And here's what's amazing about this. In A, Abraham lays the wood on Yitzchak. And in the other A, Abraham lays Yitzchak on the wood. And then in the middle, so they went both of them together. And then at the middle of that, there's a question. This is the only recorded conversation of Yitzchak with his father Abraham. Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? You might sit with that for a while and say, what is the meaning of that being the center of the chiasm? But I think if we look at the whole chiasm, you'll see that they went, both of them together. And then Yitzchak asks his father, hey, something's wrong here. Where's the lamb? His father answers, God will provide the sacrifice, my son. And then it says, so they went, both of them together. You just know Yitzchak had figured it out. Because here's the deal. There's one final big question that we need to ask about this passage. How old was Yitzchak? Because a lot of the times when I see this depicted, he's a baby. It's just a picture of Abraham putting a baby on an altar, and you're like, that's awful. That's some family mess now, isn't it? I tell you what. But no, it says in the passage that Yitzchak was clearly old enough to carry the wood for the burnt offering up the mountain. He's got to be at least 12 or 13. And he's also old enough to figure this out. I think this chiasm tells us there's a second sacrifice happening here. There's a second testing happening. The passage indicates very obviously God is testing Abraham. This seems to indicate God is also testing Yitzchak. See, I believe that God's intent was not to sacrifice Yitzchak. I believe his intent was for Yitzchak to offer himself for sacrifice. And that's what he did. Because if you think about it, again, going back, we have this big question. What kind of person will God bless the world through? What kind of person will not abuse the blessing of God? Will not take that blessing and go off and do their own thing with it? Abraham, he sacrificed his future to redeem Sarai, who was barren. But God says in 17, I will fulfill this promise through your son, Yitzchak. We know Abraham will do it, but will Yitzchak do it? And so we have a test. Climb the mountain. Will your son figure this out? And will he crawl on the altar? Do you think, in the passage, Abraham is 100 years old at least. Can you imagine a 100-year-old man being able to lift a teenager onto an altar? Can you imagine if Yitzchak didn't want to be sacrificed? Wonderful. I love it. That's the best interruption you could have. It's just so good. Do you think that if Yitzchak decided, I don't want to be sacrificed, and he ran away, that a 100-year-old plus Abraham was going to be able to chase him down and bind him forcibly? No, it's not a chance. Yitzchak knows what's going on here. And he crawls on the altar, and he allows his father to bind him. I think, I was worried when I came to this message, because this series is called Family Mess. There's no family mess going on right here. This is the absolute depiction of family health. This is how my father lives. It is good. I must live the same way. Yitzchak is doing exactly what his father does. He is living sacrificially for the benefit of others. This is super, super healthy family living, right? Where's the mess? Well, it's in the promise. The world is falling apart. It needs blessing. It needs the promise of God and his people to be redeemed. We are the family mess. The people outside this building are the family mess. Sacrificial living is how we show up and reach into that family mess. It's how we show up and help others. This is how we redeem the Sarais of the world. It is so hard to do. It is so hard because Abraham sets the bar so high. He terminates his future for Sarai. There's one more time jump we need to do because it turns out there's this amazing, amazing textual parallel happening in our recent memory about 2,000 years ago. We have Jesus. Note the parallels. Jesus, an only beloved son, is sent by his Father. He carries wood on his back for his own sacrifice to the top of a hill. He could have escaped multiple times and yet chose not to, just like Yitzchak. Jesus lays down his life for the blessing of others. So we have 3 examples in the Bible here of this kind of self-sacrifice for the blessing of others. And I think it beckons us to the question, will you be the 4th? If we can have the worship team and ministry folks come up here. We experience this sacrifice in Jesus to redeem us. Every time we come to him in prayer, every time we open our Bible, because of Jesus, we are redeemed. And I think that calls us, much like it called Yitzchak, will you live like your father? I think it calls us, will you live like your Redeemer? Will you live like Jesus? Will you sacrifice for the benefit of others? If you read through one of the most iconic scriptures, I think, in the whole of the Bible, besides, I suppose, John 3:16, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, through, I think, chapter 7, If you read through that with an eye to this self-sacrifice, with an eye for Abraham and Sarai and Yitzhak and the altar and Jesus, you see commands of Jesus that say things like, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That is sacrifice. You ever had somebody you really don't like, somebody who has wronged you in some way? Feels like you're sacrificing your right to justice, your right to punish that person or something. Jesus also says, do unto others that you would have them do to you. That sounds great for your friends. I want my friends to love me. I want my friends to show up and be there for me. What about your enemies, though? That's sacrifice. Showing up for your enemies like they're your friends. Keep your oaths. Let your word be your word. Your yes be your yes and your no be your no. It just keeps going. The whole ministry of Jesus is founded on this. I think this is why we're called to deny ourselves and take up our crosses and follow him. That is the call of the Bible, right? That is the call of the ministry of Jesus. He shows us the same example as Yitzhak. And he takes his cross and he goes to the top of the mountain. Then he says, if anyone would come after me, they must take up their cross and do the same thing. Christian, if you come up. I think finally, as we go into ministry time here, there's one final thing I want to point out. That this calls us to communion. This is something that we offer every Sunday. Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And I think that this perhaps brings new meaning to it, because it's one thing to sit with it and say, Jesus came and blessed me, he redeemed me, what a wonderful man, how great is God's faithfulness. And that's absolutely right, absolutely. But I think there's extra to it to say, it's a calling when you do communion, when you remember the sacrifice of Jesus. It's a calling, where in my life can I also sacrifice like Jesus sacrificed? How can I love my enemies? How can I do to others as I would have them do to me? How can I bless the world through God's blessing in me? It's a calling for us to rely on God in faith, to take the blessings God's given us and to give them to the world, relying on God to provide more blessing, which we then give to the world.
Thanks for listening to the Lakewood Vineyard podcast. We encourage you to respond to what you've just heard by sharing a prayer request with us on our Connect card. You can find these on our app or our website at lakewoodvineyard.org/connect. You can also respond by being generous as God has been generous to you. If you'd like to give a financial gift, you can do so at lakewoodvineyard.org/give. We hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for listening.